I'm going to call the meeting to order. So first, I would like to do attendance. We have 2 new members who were approved, elected last night at the town council meeting. So if everybody could go around and give their name and a little bit of background, that would be helpful. So Jessica Sargent, Chair of Parks and Conservation Member.
Nicole Hall, Scarborough Community Services.
Nick Bush, Community Services Director.
Hi, Stephen Zamorowski. I go by Zam. I'm on the board here.
My name's Anson Boder. Everybody calls me Anson.
Anson.
Anton,
Yeah.
A-N-T-O-N, like
Okay.
the Dvorak.
Oh.
Oh, like the worship.
Doug Williams. Parks and Conservation Board.
Maggie Vishnu.
Jamie Fitch, Sustainability Manager.
So we're missing a couple members. I expect them to trickle in. We'll have them tell you their names at that time. I am going to open the floor for public comment if there is any. Seeing none in person or online, I want to thank Jamie for joining us and ask her to give an overview of the open space plan. Jamie, do you want to have questions during or?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I don't have anything formal, so I'm just kind of here to walk through the process and kind of the plan. We can hand that down to Drew. So the town council approved funding for the open space plan in their 2025 budget. So we started this process, actually it was in their 2021, in a previous budget. So we started this process last spring to get things going, formed an ad hoc open space committee to help guide this process. Maggie and Doug were both on the ad hoc committee, Maggie representing Conservation Commission, Doug representing this group. And so we worked with a local consultant called Viewshed out of Yarmouth. And they really hit the ground running with a ton of data collection and analysis, pulled together town data, state data, land trust data, to basically see one of the biggest outcomes and one of the biggest priorities for staff in this process was actually having a better understanding of where we are in terms of our open space and what is protected in Scarborough, and kind of fine tuning our baseline numbers so we really understand what it's going to take to get to 30 by 30, the town council's goal that was set back in 2023. And so we did achieve that. So that information is in the plan. And then doing a lot of community engagement also to get community input in terms of where their values lie, and when we have opportunities to conserve or protect land, what elements are important? Is it recreation? Is it agriculture? Is it clean water? Is it climate change, marsh migration, habitat? And it turns out everything is important to everyone. There was no huge split, which, you know, we weren't able to necessarily refine our focus areas based on public feedback too much, since there was a pretty even split. And through the process, Viewshed developed what they're calling a focus, open space focus area. And I don't know, do you want to?
Is that the purple map?
Yeah. Do you want to pull it up? The map. The only thing that has changed from the version that you probably have is, like I said, the information about the build out analysis. So yeah, so
Actually, let me share it on this.
oh yeah.
And it's also,
It's on one of the ones.
Yeah, it's on page like 28 of the, yeah, there's a big one. So you can see the, so the green on this map is our existing open space. And I should say it's it's not just, it's basically whatever is protected land. So either formally conserved or protected through like the planning board process for like subdivisions and things like that. So it's not just like open undeveloped land or town-owned parcels that aren't formally protected. These are the areas that have some sort of formal protection on them. So the dark purple areas are what are considered high value open space, and the high value is based on underlying data related to like habitat and water quality and various other elements. And then basically they tried to connect those high value open spaces with our existing open space. And that's what the light purple on that map represents. And so these are basically our focus areas. So these are the areas where protection should be prioritized, but there's language in here to say if opportunities arise outside of these purple areas, the town should certainly consider them. Because obviously there's going to be important areas that aren't necessarily highlighted on this map.
And some of these are the marsh. I'm sorry.
Yeah, some of these are the marsh. Yeah, so the green area, the large green block, that's Scarborough Marsh.
Jim, can I ask you, when you sort of step back and look at the map, you can see a real natural flow of connectivity.
Yeah.
But there are a small number of parcels that are not in that
Richard Murphy.
sort of continuous flow.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of like what, and they're
Yes.
dark purple?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of what makes them so valuable outside of that connectivity?
So we can go, Nicole, do you mind scrolling a bit back in there?
This is actually not the document.
Oh, it's not,
Nope,
sorry.
it's okay. Let me find it.
While we're waiting, Rick, who is a board member, and just,
Put a
Scott
copy of the
Millie
open space
Trust.
plan right there for you.
just, we've got a couple new members. I'll make sure.
It's an
people
update.
know.
Well, I find it on the website.
Yeah, go to Stay Connected and what's happening. And scroll down to the open space plan. And then review the draft plan. And then read there you go. That'll open it up. This is still not the most up-to-date version, but like I said, it's only missing the information about the that was done.
Which map are we looking for?
Keep going a little bit. Once it loads. It is, it's a lot of information. So we're gonna be looking at the resource categories. Oh, that's the call. Page 26.
Like clean water, stuff like that.
This one.
Oh,
It's got a bunch of
I already
small
went
ones.
above it.
There's another one below it though.
Oh, is there? Okay.
So the darker parcels are the ones that oh, sure, gotcha. So the darker parcels are the ones that have kind of were ranked as being high value based on all of this analysis that Viewshed did. So they looked at water quality, habitat, agriculture, environmental hazards, recreation. What's the other one? And one other one. And then weighted it based on feedback from the community, weighted all of those kind of resource categories based on community input. And that's how they identified the high value parcels. So looking on this map, I don't necessarily know, but if you look at the smaller maps, for example, the blue is water quality. So there's some important water resources up at, I'm thinking about the parcel up by County Road, For example, it's a fairly large dark purple block that's called out on our focus area map. So looking at kind of all of the underlying data, it looks like water quality and probably, I think the green was habitat, or no, yeah, that would be agriculture and forestry, I think. So looking at those are kind of the two that come out. There's a little bit of important habitat up in that area also. So that's why that one would be called out. I mean, we do have these little pockets of dark purple areas, and theoretically, we could have just highlighted the entire town in that light purple color, but that's not overly useful. So, which is why we made some judgments in terms of not highlighting or not including some of those dark purple areas in the light purple focus area.
So the reason you're asking that is because as soon as I saw this, I've been really immediately like dissecting our evaluation sheet. And first of all, you know, like my first one was, oh my gosh, it's helpful that we can add a metric that says, okay, is it in a priority area or I don't know, the light, the
Light purple's focus area.
Okay, so sure. But then a parcel like that you mentioned on County Road then would actually score lower because it's not contiguous with other opportunities. So it's an interesting thing to think about, like how you would deal with that from a conservation standpoint.
I mean, you could adjust your form so that the high value, like if it give high value open space, or what's highlighted here as high value open space, gets an additional score or something like that. So, so even if it is outside the focus area, if it's considered high value, it could, your ranking could still score it high if you add a metric for high value open space.
And my understanding that the compilation, the map that's open space focus areas is really where a lot of these other things overlap.
Yeah.
Right. So if for instance, in a couple of spaces, I looked at the map there, and my focus is water quality, drinking water, especially west of the Pike. There are a few really some important water quality areas that aren't on this map, because then maybe they don't have any other things that brought it up to that level. So I think it's we need to take that into consideration when we're looking at that, you know, stuff that falls in the purple or the blue is going to get way high score versus other things that aren't on this map that I think are really important.
Well, and it's important to keep in mind too, this is a guide. It's
Right.
not hard and fast. It's not saying, you know, any opportunities that come up outside of the areas highlighted on the focus area map can't even be considered. There's language in here saying that that's
Right.
exactly the opposite. So,
But
Yeah.
we also know how human nature likes to focus, makes things simple.
Yeah.
We have to be just mindful of that. No, it's not in the area. Well, that's, in paragraph 4 of page 5, we said it didn't have to be in the area.
I read this as being, this purple map, as being, a guideline, help for people who aren't getting into this. I saw these, the actual GIS overlays for these 6 maps as being kind of our target.
That's kind of what I'm saying. Is
Yeah.
if it's really important in 1 or 2 of those areas, it's important. We know it's not on this map.
And then, of course, we take the next step and make sure that the questions we have apply or don't apply, whatever, as we build those in. But it's, you know, it's a new mapping day for us, which is wonderful.
Yeah, if the data is good. Like we already had a discussion about the floodplain being up to date. I'm assuming they're using the old flood, or the
Well,
new but old.
That's an important issue that we can talk about when we start trying to redo it, because essentially what this is the Maine state forecast of flooding.
Mhm.
You know, with different tide situations over the next X number of years. And they did build in the flood zones also. We don't know what date those are from, so it'll be helpful.
Jamie, can you also talk about the hazard vulnerability plan? I think that will get you.
yeah, so The town's also working on a vulnerability assessment, looking at coastal flooding and sea level rise over the next 75 to 80 years, so through 2100. And so obviously our coastal areas and probably farther inland than we like to think about are going to be impacted by rising sea levels over the next decades. And so there will be some overlap between priority areas or focus areas and the vulnerability assessment, just in terms of the health of Scarborough Marsh and giving the marsh areas to migrate inland and opportunities to migrate inland. It's going to be important to identify opportunities around the marsh so that we don't lose the marsh altogether, because we know lower areas are likely to turn into mudflat. So, the marsh is such an important resource to the town and to the state that opportunities to do conservation around the marsh are going to be really important. And having the right areas around the marsh. So like the low-lying areas where it's likely to go, and not like bluffs where there's a steep slope, and so the marsh isn't likely to move into those areas. And so that's why there is quite a bit of the light purple around the marsh, because that is going to be an important thing to be thinking about in the future.
The timing for that's been pushed back a little bit.
Just a little bit. The bulk of the work for the vulnerability assessment will be done probably by July. Our consultants are scheduled to do a second drone flight for us. So they're taking beach and dune profile measurements using a drone. The first set were done in December, with the thought that maybe we were going to have more strong coastal storms this year, and we could do an after and kind of see the effects before and after a large storm. Fortunately for us, unfortunately for the project, that didn't happen. And so now we are restricted with drone flights because of the piping plovers. So we won't be able to do that until probably September, possibly August, if we get approval from Inland Fisheries and Wildlife.
I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole, but there was a comment on in an earlier meeting, public comment about prioritizing public access. I can't remember, did any of that come up in our discussions? I just don't know if that's something we're going to have to address.
It's one of it was not top, they're all so close.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably recreation would be where that would be called out. I think in our definition of open space, we talk about public access, but also recognize that there are some areas either where public access isn't allowed. In the case that we heard last night at town council, it's a conservation easement on private property, totally appropriate for no public access in that area. But then there may be other sensitive areas where we want to protect, but where they're so sensitive that we don't want, public to be able to freely access them. Right. Yeah, and so it's kind of finding the balance of those, and understanding that there are sometimes just areas where the public shouldn't be, and being able to speak to that.
There were two references in the plan to a scorecard.
So the scorecard, I think, is essentially going to be your evaluation process. Okay. And as I said, we're going to work on taking your evaluation process and getting it into a GIS app so that it will make your evaluation a little more streamlined.
Yes, for folks who weren't here at that time, we're going to have an app. We're not going to be relying on Micah anymore. We're going to be able to access the map and do the evaluation ourselves, which is so darn cool. And then do we have general sense of timing on that?
So like I said, we're meeting with our consultant next week. So to just understand how long it's going to take for them, I think there will be two things that will determine how long this process takes. One is obviously on their end, and I think they've got the majority of the data, so I think it should be fairly quick for them. But the other is having the information from you all, so making sure that you have your ranking system the way that you want it, so that like the weights and everything that are in the back end of that app reflect the scoring that you guys follow.
And obviously we will follow whether or not that's fully public or semi behind a wall. I think my personal preference is making it fully public
Yeah.
unless there's some sensitive information. which-
Yeah, and I can't imagine that there would be anything sensitive in there, because, I mean, we'll have to talk to them to see kind of what they're thinking. But it seems like we should be able to click on a parcel and have a scorecard automatically pop up that has all of the information that that you all are looking for in your evaluation process.
all of the data driven. I mean, I think there's still going to be some pieces that aren't on the map or like in an app.
Will there be the ability to subdivide those parcels?
That's a good question. We'll have to find out about
Because
that.
like in the easement, the grant easement, it's a
Yeah.
partial.
I feel like there should be able to be a way for like to draw a polygon and have it rank the area inside the polygon.
We'll probably see more of that
Yeah.
going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of it.
Not to get too far into the weeds, we've had some sliver problems with parcels, so if it could. So for example, it doesn't say it's adjacent to existing open space because there's this little tiny bit, so we might want to add a little bit of buffer in there so we don't get weird sliver stuff. And that's just a GIF, that's just part of the mapping function. Slivers can be problematic.
Exactly. Depends on what the weather was that day. And
Yes, like
a lot of things.
if it matches up a little like this, then we can get skewed results. We need to make sure it doesn't give false scores.
I'm just making notes, so I remember what to talk to them about.
So our questionnaire is gonna be coming in. Did I just understand that correctly?
That's the goal.
Some version of it, yeah.
Probably a subset because there's specific information that would be in the mapping that we would use still in our evaluation. It'd be kind of, I'm thinking that it's replacing Micah's.
Yeah, kind of to automate the information that Micah gets for you all.
So then, just to connect the dots, what the public will see, say on the website, is a subset of what we're discussing and what we're doing.
Yeah, they should be able to go in and click on like their property, for example, to be like, oh, how does my property rank in terms of, I don't want to even say like priority, like for conservation value, how would my property rank just based on these X number of elements? And obviously, like you said, there's certain aspects to your evaluation process that can't be captured through a GIS map. But it'll be one step in the process that you all go.
I'm saying we're not being replaced by a map.
That's what I was wondering.
No, Mike is being replaced by.
Mike is being replaced by, which he's probably very happy about.
I'm sure he is.
But as we all know, that's a starting, the Micah's GIS analysis has been a starting point for our discussion. We still, as a
To
group,
rely on.
go through the findings in each category and there are other aspects of the evaluation tool that aren't mapped.
So there is a transition period to get to this app. So, this isn't like, download it, turn it on. It's going to have to be developed.
Right.
We don't even have the GIS overlays that are part of the development process. So we need to get access to the GIS overlays for Micah to help us with short term, and then we can take it over. Or if you can give us that and we
Yeah,
can do it, that's great. I just don't want to plan on the app and have it be 2 years out.
Right, yeah, it won't be 2 years out, they'll be pretty quick about it, because they have, like I said, the majority of the underlying data, but yeah, they, need to deliver the GIS layers to us. It just hasn't happened yet, because I literally got the revised plan yesterday afternoon, so we're still kind of, the project's not over yet. But
Yeah, we had a property just, a week ago, was approved last night. And it was, I was really looking forward to getting those maps,
Yeah.
because we were trying to use these and say, okay, does it fall in there?
Yeah, we were.
So it'll be really nice.
Here's a quick question about terminology here.
Yep.
I'm having a hard time finding it. It might be here. Can you tell us what the definitional differences are between vacant land and underdeveloped land?
So underdeveloped is basically, there may be, a structure on it, like for example, like it might be an old shed or something like that. It's largely undeveloped, but there might be a little bit of, there might be a small home on it. It would likely be one of, like the situation from last night where there was a home, but then like a large, portion of it was undeveloped and open. And so there was the opportunity for a conservation easement. So, they went through, and did a GIS analysis, obviously looking for undeveloped parcels, but then if there were, and again, their threshold was 5 acres, so anything, over 5 acres that only had like a house or a small structure on it. And then there would be opportunities for splitting off or putting an easement on a portion of a parcel. So before, when we were doing this in-house, we were like, oh, well, we're just gonna take off anything that had a building on it. And that's not really a good, accurate kind of way to determine what land is left, because there are opportunities for easements on a portion or subdividing and conserving a portion. So
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
So I think that the app opportunity, not in my wildest dreams, but I think we were going to get an app. So what do you need from this board to be able to move forward? Because I think that is a priority for us, because that is such a game-changing tool.
yeah,
Recognizing it's a subset of our considerations.
I would say your scoring criteria and how you weight the different kind of resources or elements that you might see on a parcel.
Is it possible to develop a tool that would allow us to change the weighting? Meaning, do we have to have the weighting finalized now?
Oh, you can do updates as things
Okay.
change. Yeah, and the way I'm envisioning it is our consultants will build it, but it'll be handed off to us, and Micah can go in and make revisions as needed as things change.
You know, we need to go through it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's why I was concerned.
You know, look at the questions, look at the links, look at,
Yes,
you know, the links to this, look at the way we weight things. I mean, I was doing this yesterday on my own. And we're not, for example, with the clean water, we're not, certainly not getting there the way we probably want to, for example, you know, but on some other things like habitat, we seem to be pretty strong. So
and we might
So
want
we-
to test it.
we don't want to hand that
Yeah,
over yet. You know, we need to get into
Yes.
it.
Well, and I was going to say too, whatever tool is developed, before it's like fully implemented, it'll be shared with you all to kind of go through and maybe look at past projects that you've recommended for funding, and go through the process and see how what is given to you through the app how it relates to how you scored it in real life. Go through a couple of different scenarios.
It would be great if we could also, especially since we have new people who are here and really interested in this stuff, is to go back to the scoring for the other properties in the past. And say, you know, how does that stack up to what we've got here? And can we use those as quote unquote benchmarks? And it's only part of the process, I understand, but still it'd be nice to be able to say, and the whole point of doing points is to be able to compare it to other pieces, you know. And I know the town manager mentioned to me that he's concerned about our older rankings in terms of points. And, you know, we should look at it and say, does this still carry forward? You know, our questions are not time related. Although with things like marsh migration, you know, it could rank differently now than it did before because of the change.
You could also go back, I mean, if the app was really automated, you could go and rescore those parcels with the new system. We're probably not gonna finish today, is that what you're saying?
So what's he's concerned about? How far back is he concerned?
Oh, no, he
Just a
just said,
comment.
you know, he was just talking about taking a look at it, making sure that we're tying into the open space plan, using that data effectively, making sure that the evaluation process is picking up the latest information. That's his concern. It's a good one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have so much more information than we've ever had before. This is a big leap forward. And so we're gonna need to get comfortable, we're going to need to test it. My thought was sort of setting up the framework, the structure, so that we can begin to start asking detailed questions. So for example, we want to include all of these components. And the weights and how we include them might change. Or I'm not saying that as a position. There might be components we don't want to include for certain reasons, but that's how we start the conversation. However, I did want to pause and see if there's any public comment before we kind of jump into the nitty-gritty of it, or if anybody has any questions. There's no one online. Any public comment?
Just say, I think you've already mentioned this, that the landmark request, first reading, town council last night, passed, 7-0.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
pretty
yes, sorry.
exciting.
Yeah.
And so we're looking forward to second reading.
Which will be on the 16th.
Always good to have people come out, make comments about it, especially if they're in support of it. And
Well, and it's great that it's happening on the 16th. That's when hopefully the council is adopting the open space plan, and we'll also be unveiling we're working on creating essentially an art piece that will be a visual tracker for the 30 by 30 goal also. And so it's a little interactive for the town council. Whenever more land is added to the 30 by 30 goal, they will pour sand into the piece of art. Hopefully we will get it totally full, representing 30% of land protected in Scarborough. And so we will be adding the Larrabee Farm parcel to the piece of art that night also. That's the goal. So it'll be a big open space and conservation thread weaving through that agenda.
So Jamie, I'm asking you to repeat yourself. There was a build-out analysis that is why we're getting the new version.
Yeah.
And the great news from the build-out analysis is
That there is enough land in Scarborough to achieve 30% protected. Whether that happens over the next 5 years, I mean, I think that the time frame might be a little bit lofty, but the fact that we can actually achieve 30% of Scarborough being conserved is fantastic. So, and my numbers were off when I quoted you. So I will read the information that was added that's different from the version that if you looked at it previous to today. So based on a build out analysis of lots greater than 5 acres, there are approximately 3,500 acres of vacant land and 4,000 acres of underdeveloped land in Scarborough overall. When looking just at lots that fall within the open space focus areas, there are approximately 2,000 acres of vacant land and 2,000 acres of underdeveloped land. This is almost double the amount of land needed to achieve 30 by 30. So, like I said, my numbers were off. So we need about 2,000 more acres to achieve 30 by 30. And just in our focus areas, there's about 4,000 acres available that can be protected. So
It's 7,500 acres across.
overall.
And do we think that this open space plan has a 5-year shelf life?
No, no, this is way beyond 5 years. So
At some point, we all need to think about beyond.
yeah, I mean, and that was some of the conversation that staff have had with our consultant, because we are very focused on 30 by 30, but once we hit 30%, conservation in Scarborough shouldn't end.
Stop.
So it's a goal, and it will be a feather in our cap if it's achieved, but that's not where open space conservation should end.
Yeah, I have a comment about this, especially as we're communicating with the public about this, and the art piece sounds awesome. It looks great. And you made the quote, you said town council's goal of 30 by 30. I have 2 comments. And one is it's our goal.
Yes.
And not only it's a state goal, it's an international goal.
Yeah.
Right. So I think a lot of people, when they hear town council, they just came up with this 30 by 30 thing on their own. I think we need to communicate to the public. This is not just Scarborough thing that we came up with because we're tree huggers. you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think though, it's also important for people to understand that this goal is endorsed by the town council and is set
Absolutely.
by resolution. So it's not just something that we're saying, we're going to actively work towards achieving it. And
Right.
knowing that the town council backs it is an important factor in that.
Absolutely.
And I remember, our town council liaison, Sharon, yes, sitting here, I think it was here, or it could have been in another meeting,
There's a lot of them.
saying, where do we start? In terms of, so I think as a group, we can find a place to start, definitely. But as a conservation goal, I think that's important. And I know we have an implementation plan, but it's big.
It is, yeah.
No, Jamie, I have to agree with Sam though, when we were doing and I'm not saying anything against what you were saying, but council's for this, and that's huge. It wouldn't happen without it. But I wasn't getting the sense from people when we were doing the surveys, when when I was interacting with the public as part of the open space, is that there were 3 different things which, again, do that. And people thought the 30 by 30 thing, either hadn't heard of it or thought it was just something that we came up with. We, meaning us who work on committees, and the council. So I think the tool that you talk about, getting thing out there and all that, part of the education needs to be, why are we doing this? Why is it important? And how big is it? Because it's a lot bigger.
The other thing is, I think, we talk about 30 over 30 is the goal. Well, it's really not a goal, it's a strategy. The goal is for us to maintain our livelihood and our lives. That's the goal, right? We're trying to keep ourselves alive in our livelihood.
Have drinking water.
Yes, have drinking water. That's the goal.
It's that serious.
The 30 by 30 thing is a strategy that we're implementing to kind of, as a rallying cry.
We're fortunate in a lot of places, and they are having trouble drinking water. Huge problems, just as an example.
So Doug was very thoughtful and put together some materials, and I propose that is how we begin to think about this. I'm gonna call it an update. So our original open space plan is over 20 years old. It's our new open space plan, so we're gonna call it an update. Or, we can call it the scorecard, whatever we wanna do is, how do we begin to incorporate / update with the new open space plan? It is not technically final yet, but it will be in 2 weeks. So I think we can feel very confident moving forward. It's not gonna change.
No, so we had a workshop with the town council at the beginning of March. One of their questions, which is honestly something that should have been in here all along, was, well, how much land do we have that can be conserved? And we're like, that is a great question. Let's figure that out, because that's fairly easy to do. And so that is why there was that update to the plan with that information.
Can I speak? I'm sorry.
Not sorry.
Well, I wanted to follow up on that. There's a really nice outlay about the different categories of land. And a bunch of that includes different designations in town owned land here. And 500 acres of which are undeveloped and what was it? Town owned land at 400 acres that is in a natural state that has not been protected as conserved conservation land.
Yeah.
I know about a year ago, the land trusts requested to town council that maybe 3 small parcels be passed to them. That happened. Is there any conversation about some portion of these 400 acres going through similar process?
I know that in the workshop, the town council was interested to know which parcels would be appropriate for conservation. I mean, there's a lot of different moving parts and needs in the town, so definitely can make some suggestions and recommendations, recognizing that we need to understand what's going on with the school project and things like that, although I don't think that any of our existing town-owned properties are going to be, are in consideration for the school project, but I would want to confirm that. But yeah, definitely, I mean, and maybe that would be a test case for the app that's developed, is to look at some of the town-owned parcels and see how they rank using the scoring app. And make some of those recommendations to council, whether they, formally transfer them to Scarborough Land Trust or put an easement on them with Scarborough Land Trust.
So, okay, related to that, this is maybe the hardest question in the room, is there simultaneously conversations about how the town would buy land? Because, the land trust is only one tool in meeting the 30 by 30 goal, right?
Right.
And it's unfair, in fact, for the town to put the expectation that the land trust alone would be doing that.
Yeah.
Is the town going to play a role in that directly?
That hasn't been a full conversation yet. I think that we're going to have to start thinking very long-term in terms of our impacts from sea level rise. And if the town is going to purchase land, it may have to focus, and this is just me speaking, this hasn't been discussed with town administration or council or anything like that, but we may need to be thinking about our vulnerable areas and purchasing those with the goal of restoring sand dunes and things like that for to deal with sea level rise and the impacted areas of Scarborough. So while that's not necessarily what this group might think of in terms of conservation, if there's a restoration component involved in it as well, it could be relevant, and it would become essentially open space, restoring built areas to natural space. I see that as being a piece of the conversation. I know when Todd was the director, he was interested in the town purchasing open space for like active and passive recreation, not just playing fields, but other recreational opportunities and things like that. So it's been a conversation, but it hasn't been kind of, I don't see a real path that's formed yet, but I think it'll become more prevalent in the conversation moving forward.
I do think that there's an opportunity for us to identify how we work with other committees and boards to, what our role is and how that fits with what other committees are doing, because we should be working together, and how do we do that, and how do we best fit. And so, for example, it might be a joint conversation with the Conservation Commission. And I'm thinking in particular, I don't know what committee can do the vulnerability assessment, but that's a whole.
There's a working group.
But there's a whole different slate of funding that goes into how do we begin to
Theoretically.
The land bond can't do it all.
Right.
The land bond will be a part. How do we leverage our resources across boards and committees to achieve these goals? And I don't think we figured that out yet. But we can identify points where there might be opportunity.
I guess, yeah. I'm
How are we
sorry.
gonna implement the vulnerability assessment? We are part of that, but we are not.
But not the only
We're not
part.
the only part, and I don't think we're the leaders. So, sorry.
Right, no, I thought you were done, sorry. I guess another way to ask that is, what's the plan to implement the implementation plan?
Yeah.
In other words, who owns that?
So you can kind of see, so the planning department is going to be kind of the department that takes the lead kind of steward role of this plan, but you can see in the implementation plan, we've identified various groups that will have a role in the strategies, and whichever group is bolded, that's essentially who is likely to be the lead, who makes the most sense to be the lead on the strategies that are recommended in this plan. And so first off, as part of the fiscal year 26 budget, planning is requesting funding to do a sidewalk and trails master plan, so identify gaps in our sidewalk and trail system. That's a recommendation from this plan. It's a recommendation from the transportation assessment that is wrapping up. It is, look on page 37. It's strategy 3.5, develop a trails master plan and map the formal and informal trails in town and foster a safe interconnected trail system. And so that's not just going to be trails, it's going to be sidewalks also. And looking for connections between our open spaces for people movement. We talk a lot about open space connectivity for habitat, which is super important. But making it easier for people to access open space is important. Also, having safe walking and biking areas.
So that's another example of something we would want to incorporate when it's completed. Because I think that the trails, because of the purposes in the land, would be something we want to incorporate into our scorecard. So our scorecard is not going to be,
It's there now. I mean, we look
Yes.
at existing
Yes.
and potential trails now, and we rate those and we give a score. I'm not saying we don't need to update it, but we always have
yes,
looked at trails and.
Yeah.
And we should continue with the trails. I mean, one big thing we don't have the towns build out focus areas. The areas where they want to put all the apartments. I mean, we don't have those in our analysis. We have to rely on land trust or whoever to tell us whether this is in any of those focus areas. So that's just another piece of information.
So we can include growth areas as part of the app also. I'll make a note of that.
and that's a
But the
great
trails are
point.
important.
Things that we would like included. Identifying layers. we would like to- I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, no, it's fine. Two things. The ordinance revision, it's sure the open space fund, I assume that's us.
Yeah.
Okay, is consistent with the priorities in the open space plan. And I noticed that we're not the lead on that. And we're not even on that.
Is that the fund or is that the impact fee or?
2.1.
Yeah, it says existing open space fund.
Okay, so there are, oh gosh,
Yeah, I don't actually know what planning codes was. See, we can make another update. This hasn't been finalized
all
yet.
right. We get the update, there are a couple categories.
When we were formed, we proposed and approved a land bond fund for not the bonding process, that's a different process. And it was supposed to take input from developers or whoever and build up some sort of fund to aid in purchasing. It hasn't been used extensively, but recently in 2024 was used particularly because the town, because of the sale of a land bond property to the Historical Society, produced 300,000 or so roughly of funds that went into the land bond fund. So there's actually, I believe, some money in the land bond fund right now.
Yes.
What we didn't do, and it's not in our purview, is something that they asked when it's impact fees. Has nothing to do with us. It'd be great if there's an appropriate way to do that, but that's a planning issue. So when I pulled out the 9 strategies that had us listed and finding additional funding, consider additional funding mechanisms for maintenance and stewardship of land. I don't know. That's certainly important. I'm not saying it's not important.
I was thinking of that under implications for our charge, like, again, I think more broadly, what is our role in implementing the open space plan? But, which I think is going to be a robust discussion about what is our role and how do we coordinate with other missions.
So, another one that I had noticed that we had talked about before was that whole data collection. is a place to start, create a system of, to me, that's gonna be, and, you know, the app is part of that. Right, so that, I mean, that's,
I mean, that's
kind
that's
of the basis
displaying the
for
data, but it's not necessarily collecting the data. So this is more, I think to,
internal systems.
well, the data collection is kind of getting to Andrew's point through the process, saying the data that this is based on is state data. It's not necessarily, or it's data that was collected at the state level. It's not recent local data. So really looking for if there are opportunities to collect local data, then that information should be incorporated into this plan and replace some of the state data that's in there.
And
Can
then
we request from Shed what the source of the underlying data sources are and the update schedule, if any? So for example, the state might update once a year. We know that, then we know we need to update on that, just so that we can keep a running tally of data sources and the frequency of their updates. Some of them are just, they update them when they update them, and that is what it is. But I think there would be opportunities for us to identify high priority areas that we would like to get rid of because of the limitations that's available.
In terms of looking at alignment of all of the partners and all of the entities working towards conservation goals, I'm just wondering if education is a place to start for looking at where we can work together. An outreach and communication plan, good land stewardship, just, you know, working with community partners to encourage the use of conservation land for education, you know, I just wonder if that is a place that where we could join hands and work together.
We're about 1 hour in. My proposal is we start with integrating to our, I'm gonna call it our framework, our tool. Do other folks have areas that they, before we start? It's, where do we?
So I apologize. I thought this was a workshop with a council. Somehow I mixed that up. And so are you talking about actually getting into the evaluation form and going through all the questions and trying to relate those to this open space plan, or?
I was thinking there's a couple of ways we can approach it. There's the crosswalk, right? Like, well, this has always been part of our evaluation and this new map is now the best available data. That seems the simplest because that's the one for one. So we could identify areas where there's a one for one. This is how we evaluated it in the past. This is the map we've used, but now we're going to do use. Now we have this. The other option is we go by my thought, if we have the categories that were identified in the open space plan, and that we could begin by looking, chunk it by category of benefit. So that would be, is it
Right.
6, 7?
Each of the individual maps is where we target.
Each of the individual maps, and then we would identify in those categories any opportunities, challenges, limitations, additions that we would want to do. So it's kind of, do we start with our existing framework and see what matches one for one, or do we do it by category? Because I think the category makes outwardly facing the category, we want to be able to say we looked at it by category as considered as the open space plan. How we get there is up to us, but
I agree, the end result should be matching the open space.
yes. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all of the categories. So for example, we know that we consider additional information when evaluating an application.
Right.
So that we will have more than these categories that are considered in the open space plan based on our experience and what we think is important. But I think we do have to include the categories the way that they're outlined in the open space plan. So it's externally transparent.
Yeah, I bet you we could squeeze most of it into one of the categories.
Either way, I have a question about the maps, because they're an integral part of that process. Both of the old maps that we've used in the past and described here. My questions are a little bit mundane. But before we rely on these maps, I think it's kind of important to know where are the maps now and where will they be permanently. I know the answer, but I think that will we be able to always get to those maps, not have to go digging for them. So that's the first question. Where are they? Where are they going to be? The second is about credentialing. I'm sure that it's in there, but I just can't see whose maps they are, what the source of the information is, and how often they'll be updated in the future. For example, the old maps were beginning with habitat, they're somewhat dated now. So before we use those maps, we kind of like to have a sense of have they been replaced, and if these are replaced in the future. That needs to be part of our credential integrity. And then along with that is who owns the maps and tweak them, or are there proprietary issues that we need to deal with? So those are my questions. It really is about the validity and the ability to rely on these maps and use them for 20 years.
So currently the maps are with our consultant, but they will turn, the data layers are with our consultant. They will turn them over to us. They were built using publicly available data. So beginning with habitat is what is represented on the habitat maps, for example. Information from like DEP for water quality, that's what's represented on the water quality map. So they're publicly available data sources. Basically, my understanding is the way that Micah used to do this process to evaluate properties is he would go to all of those individual websites to pull that information. And what Viewshed has done is basically pulled the data into the layers that they'll turn over to us. And so, yeah, we're going to have to monitor when updates are made so that we're sure that the data in those the underlying data that is creating those layers, the town.
Okay.
Yeah, this will be managed by the town. They'll
Like your department.
Yeah, it'll be Micah as our GIS administrator. He'll be, I'll have to ask him to do it, but yeah, he will be the one responsible for checking for any updates in the data. We can work it into it annually. Just do a quick check of the data and incorporate anything that's been updated. The state doesn't update data very frequently, unfortunately. And then we can incorporate, I'll have to talk to Micah about what makes the most sense, but I feel like in our advanced web GIS viewer, we can have maybe an open space category and have all of these layers able to be turned on and off if you want to kind of create your own or look at some of the individual data and things like that.
Where will that tool be housed?
It's on the town's website.
The town will own that?
Yes, we own the data. So we paid Viewshed to do this. So they haven't turned it over to us yet, but we will own the data that was created, the layers that were created. Yes.
On an ongoing basis.
Yes.
And probably this is too far in the weeds, but is there going to be anything like an audit trail that will help us to look and say, oh, well, this one was last updated in 2025. And before that, it was 2019 or something. Is it going to be kind of like a chronology of?
There should be, but I'll have to talk to Micah about how that's documented.
Okay. The reason I'm asking this question is because if we have this is very great, by the way. It looks very powerful, very helpful. But if we're going to have an application and go to a website or somebody else goes to a tool and plugs in the property location, we get back an assessment, kind of like a draft assessment. We really need to know that we can count on that, and we need to have the credentialing process to go along with that. So that, yeah, well, we found that there were certain attributes and benefits that we value. Here's how they score, and this is why we trust that score.
It's right, 3.1.
Right. In that vein, Jim, and I know you're not gonna know the answer to this right now, because it's, you know, we're really in the weeds with this stuff, but if we look at Appendix A, the water quality map, it's one of the, well, appendix pages, so it's the first one. of the appendix. And it's a good example of what Rick is getting at, I believe. I think from our standpoint, we want a reliable map like this in the GIS system that you're managing for us, and be able to build into the app. You can see on the left of this, you can see the level of detail. And then if you go down to the bottom, in very small print, you can see the 14 different sources. So the reality is that if we want to make sure that this water quality map is updated, we'll probably have to go back to the view shed on some
Yeah, I mean,
basis.
this
you know,
may be
5
something that-
years, 7 years, whatever.
that we build into our, kind of our operational budget that on a, I don't know if yearly makes sense, like you said, maybe every 5 years, we
wouldn't
just
have to
plan
be
to go back and have them do a quick data review to make sure that the layers that are being used are up to date.
I think we almost have to, given the level of quality here. This is great stuff. And if the question is, you know, how often do we have professionals who have access to all this stuff look at it and say, you know, it's due for a change, due for an upgrade.
And even have that on the bottom, you know, it's like, what,
Yeah.
so what are the dates of these sources? You know, where do we get this?
Or at least have a date
We don't need
for
that.
when it was created,
Yeah.
Right, so this.
when the
would be-
map was
Because
created.
we really don't want to getting into what level of all these things are with NASA and everything
But I
else.
think that's what Rick is talking about.
When was the map updated?
Right, I think just the date that the map was created, and then if you go back to the data sources and the data sources were updated after the date that the map was created, then you know it needs to be updated. But we don't necessarily need dates for each of these individual sources.
I'm just, in my mind, I'm thinking, suppose there's a question. Public, you know, somebody in the public has a question about, you know, so I guess somebody in your office then could look that up and answer the question.
Right,
think
you
our
can just put a note here, these sources per use shed compilation on date.
Yeah.
Something.
That's available data as of April
And we are relying
3rd,
on quality
2025.
consultant to do it. And that's
So,
just the way it is.
following Rick's comment, I was curious, like, I went into to being with Habitat, for example, you brought that up, that's a state produced document. So I went to being with Habitat website and then went to Scarborough to see what map that this consultant is using, and it's 2023, which frankly, I was actually. I
Really
thought
good.
more-
Surprised.
more- I thought it was like 2005 or something, you know.
I
Now, you
will
know,
say-
you realize that we've been using that 2023 map for about the last 5 evaluations we did. If you look at Mike's notes.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if like the data specifically for Scarborough was updated in 2023.
I'm gonna Scarborough now.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, but.
It was over those last 5 that I'm talking about, because I went back and looked at Mike's notes on the evaluation.
Oh, good.
Because Micah has instituted a best practice of telling us which map. That's why our evaluation tool has so many colors, but it's also really helpful because he has documented what version of things he's using, because it does evolve over time. But we do have a record of that in a very messy, colorful way. But I do think that we should be transparent and have established guidelines that we're using the maps, you know, the best available data as of whatever date the maps were created. And a reasonable expectation, it sounds like from this group, is updates every 5 years. An annual update is likely outside of the budget and isn't going to change very much. Which is still really good, because these are public websites and they don't change. They're not changing on a weekly basis.
Yeah, the state doesn't have the funding or the staffing to do big updates on a regular basis.
No, Jamie, having you having your office ordering this stuff. It's so, such a huge step forward from the standpoint of us having really reliable information. So, you know, it's a real positive thing. Sorry, that, you know, we're always gonna throw stuff at you.
It's fine, that's why we're
Not
here.
ready for it, but it's really cool. I was, if I could get us on back to, if you don't mind, you were talking just about looking at the evaluation form, you know, how do you approach this? And there's a couple of different ways to do this. I pulled out the open space focus areas from the plan. Now, the clean water, sea level rise / marsh migration, recreation and connectivity, environmental hazards, habitat, working land. So we've got 6 categories. Now, under those, there are detailed. For example, clean water, and this is from the plan, includes rivers, streams, ponds, percent impervious surfaces, highly erodible soils, significant aquifers, recharge areas, erodible bluffs. That's kind of the stuff you saw on the left of that water map just a minute ago. So then I went to ours and said, okay, if I go through our evaluation form, how many of those are touching on the clean water? I'm touching on these clean water criteria. Well, first of all, we're going to use the map, so that's a given. But from the standpoint of the point system, do we, you know, are we hitting clean water and are we hitting it enough? So I think if we went through and did it that way, and I actually did a rough version of that, that we can use as a starting point. But if we go through and we say, you know, question 1, is that habitat? Is that clean water? Is that impervious? Is that you know, things like environmental hazards, which is flood zones, highly erodible soils, erodible bluffs, shoreline zones, potentially hazardous sites. So very, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on. Some of these are repetitive because you get erodible soils, both clean water and environmental hazards. So we shouldn't, personally, I don't think we want to say we want to use those as some way of doing the evaluation. I think we want to use those and the quality of the maps and the plan to go through and say, do we have evaluation criteria that meet those, as well as other things like, you know, community, views and things like that. We have a few questions that don't fall into this stuff. So, but I think it's pretty easy to go through and say, is our existing question, first of all, is it clean water related, and is it worthwhile? Because it gives us an opportunity to look at every question and say, do we really want to keep this? And then second of all, we can add stuff. I mean, we don't really hit the marsh migration very well. We have 100-year floodplain questions. I'm not sure how we need to talk about that as a committee and say, you know, is that really what marsh migration is? I mean, you know, because there's different criteria being used, and it's so 100-year floodplain becomes less meaningful if you're looking at a 30-year inundation, which is kind of forecast. So from the standpoint of marshy.
The way I'm thinking about it is I'd like to restructure it under these 6 categories. So taking the current evaluation tool and taking the pieces and which do they fall under. So taking the existing evaluation tool, going through the categories and putting them under one of the 6, or we could have them referenced on
Almost all of our questions employ more than one.
Yes, and then we would identify those that we have new information for. So kind of gap. I don't know if there are gaps. So there's either we have data from this that we can use to calculate it under the existing tool, or do we have new information? And then I'm gonna call it the 7th category, which is those that aren't included in the mapping that we want to keep, that are in the existing evaluation tool, or we would like to be in the evaluation tool, that don't fall under one of these 6. I don't think we have to shoehorn into all of these 6 categories. I think we can have a PCLB 7th category, and that's
Other considerations.
other considerations.
Can I ask a question about this? This might sound totally counterintuitive, but let's say a question goes into, is moved into the clean water ranking map. And this map very clearly shows clean water scores from low of 2 to a high of 21. Which actually gets prioritized? A parcel that has the lowest clean water score or a parcel that has the highest clean water score?
So the scores are a little bit, they're just kind of relative. So those, basically the scores show, essentially the number of different elements that are in that location.
Yeah.
So for example, like the very dark areas on the water quality map, it's on page 15 of the report. The ones with the high score, so example, they, like down near like Holmes Road and Broad Turn Road, there's like a dark navy blue dot in there. So those are, I can tell you that that's like in the Phillips Brook watershed, which is one of the town's urban impaired streams. So it probably gets a lower number. It's interesting that percent impervious. So percent impervious is a little counterintuitive. The less impervious it is, the higher number it gets, because we want our watersheds to not be paved over. But they just have more kind of these elements in there. So it could be a recharge area. It could have unstable erodible bluffs. It doesn't currently have a 75-foot buffer around it necessarily. So that would have, that's weird. I'm sorry, I'm just looking more closely at this and it's giving a higher number to a narrower buffer. You would think that a wider buffer would have a higher ranking number. But it's just a way to look and see, oh, there's lots of different elements that go into water quality in this area versus not a lot of elements that go into water quality in this area.
I understand that.
Okay.
And I apologize, I didn't ask my question clearly. So, right, on this map, it's showing that the darker colors, intuitively, I think you look at this map and say the darker color areas are the ones that you want to score higher, prioritize higher for conservation. Or is it the exact opposite? Because you want to focus your conservation on areas that are having the most problems currently and in need of restoration opportunities. And that's what I'm a little confused on how we would apply that in this circumstance from a conservation standpoint.
And I'm wondering, do you have restoration potential captured in your ranking? And is that something that you might want to include?
What do you mean by restoration?
So,
I was wondering what NOAA means. I mean, we've never talked about it, right?
Yeah. So let's say that what's the Red Brook one that goes behind the mall?
no, well, yes, Red Brook is near the mall. Yeah.
Okay, let's use Red Brook like around the mall as an example, right? And in that situation, I think that a parcel around Red Brook here would have a very low color on it. Because it doesn't have all of these currently clean water properties. And so if you compare that to one, let's say next to Broad Turn Farm, that's like super intact and really clean water, you'd say, oh, wow, that's the ones near Broad Turn Farm are dark blue, the ones at Red Brook are white. But there's this one parcel near Red Brook that's for sale, and conserving that parcel would minimize additional impact onto it, because there's so much development around it already impacting it. And so we could consider using that as we could remove a house and revegetate that parcel. You know,
That would be restoration.
that would be an example of restoration, right? But that would not be captured. Or the opposite would be evident on this map if you're applying, saying, we're gonna score a darker blue property as a higher value in our ranking compared to a lighter color property. That it may be that this group does want to just protect what's currently clean. That's our focus. And that's a fine conversation. I just want to clarify that because we're talking about two different things, but they're both meaningful.
Yeah, I think that historically, and not necessarily just in Scarborough, but when we think about land conservation, it is the untouched, like healthy, pristine areas that you want to protect. And it's good to know that we still have about, 7,000 acres of that in Scarborough, but if there are opportunities for, to purchase a property, and I've got one in mind, so I'll use it as an example, and John's. It was for sale a while ago. That property is literally built in the marsh, so if the opportunity arose to purchase that and restore it, is that something that this group would consider, or it would likely rank very low in your scoring criteria, because it's pretty much all impervious. And it would require some obviously extensive restoration to get it back to marsh. But there's so many other kind of factors with that parcel that it would be a good one to no longer be a restaurant there. Yeah.
But it would rank high in marsh mitigation.
Marsh migration, but
It would-
low in everything else.
That's what, right.
And so I think, this process isn't black and white. There's a whole lot of gray in there. And figuring out how to capture that, I think.
And where is that? Is it?
Right under the water.
It's still a restaurant.
It's gonna be underwater.
They have reopened.
10 years.
They
I
reopened.
can never tell.
Underwater.
The other 3-year contracts.
So I'd like to propose a three-tiered approach. The first is to organize our existing evaluation criteria under the seven categories, 7 being the other considerations. Then going through the plan to identify any additional information that we think we might consider a criteria evaluation scoring criteria for based on new information in the open space plan. And then the third piece would be the nitty gritty points, which I think is going to be our more vigorous conversation. So I'm saying we organize our existing criteria under the 7 categories, just where they fit. Then next, we identify if there are any new criteria that come out of the open space plan. And then the third piece would be the scoring. And that might be where we identify the overlap, or we might want to consider it in a new way, but the scoring, we don't discuss the points until the third piece. So the first is just sorting, the second is identifying gaps, and then the actual scoring, which I think you started to do.
Yes. I just would recommend that we're going to use the open space focus areas. There's a lot of overlap. So if we're just categorizing, and that's what you're talking about. You're talking about categorizing under those, which is fine. And then looking at what we lack, what we have lack. My problem with them is that there's, in 2 situations, they're talking about the same stuff.
Right.
So, if we're talking about clean water, we're also talking about environmental hazards. And if we're talking about sea level rise, we're also talking about environmental hazards. So we might want to think about what that means in terms of categories,
Yes.
but that's fine.
And I think there are a couple different ways that we can deal with overlap, but we could decide that in the points portion of the conversation. So for example, if there is an evaluation criteria that fits under multiple categories, I think we keep it in the multiple categories because that's informative, that
It's weighted.
it might be weighted more, but we wouldn't determine that until, we would either determine at the third point that we give more points to that category because it's integral to multiple categories, or we split the points between the categories, or we assign it to a category. I think we can have that debate at the end versus now. I think it would be good to just start with a sorting of where things fall, and if there are duplicates, that's great and a conversation we need to have, but not that we need to resolve.
Don't we currently have things that are in multiple categories?
Well, we actually have categories for multiple things.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, and I'm not saying that's the way to do it. It's just that, when we start, there's a lot of similarity in this analysis in terms of the way they weight everything they do with clean water. So I don't think we should waste a lot of time trying to figure out if something falls into environmental hazards because it's in the shoreline zone or clean water because it's in the shoreline zone. And I also don't think it gets extra points because it might qualify as clean water and environmental hazard. It shouldn't get any extra points for that. It's just something they created as part of the focus area stuff that we did. A whole bunch of people got together and they said, what's important? And they said, okay, those are important things. So I buy that. It's just that the way this worked out was that the environmental hazards are not it's not a meaningful name in Scarborough. The environmental hazards in Scarborough are flood zones, marsh, mitigation, marsh issues, and water flow, clean water, et cetera. So, and to some degree, fertilizer, fertilizer for homes, farms, et cetera. So we don't have a lot of, I just don't want us to waste time trying to figure out, how many categories of these things that fall into. Let's do that. Let's classify it this way. And then let's identify which questions seem to be most fit the category the best. That's fine. But then let's worry about the point system. Let's worry about what the questions actually say. Are they getting us where we want to go? And are they giving us a scoring criteria that's meaningful? Because we can't replicate this scoring criteria.
And I'm not arguing for that.
Doug, I think what Jessica is saying is we start with some kind of overarching organizational chart or department scheme. The purpose of which, with respect to the scoring, is to get to those departments or goals. So I think what you're saying is use the focus areas from the open space plan as a starting place, which is habitat, clean water, working lands, recreation, connectivity, sea level rise, marsh mitigation, and environmental hazards. A lot of the recent applications we've had have focused on those big things. It's habitat and clean water, some recreation and connectivity. So we've already been doing that in practicality, but we can't lose sight of the fact that the charge of Parks and Conservation Land Board was to provide or maintain public access, which is not emphasized in the open space plan. As valuable as the open space plan is, and the recent conservation easement we just here recommended here shows that not every project is going to have public access. Yet it is one of our objectives that considerations we need to take, and also allow for passive or active recreation. Well, that's consistent here, so that's duplicated. Conserve water quality, natural resources, or the natural areas. It's definitely an overlap. Provide easements for walking or biking is in our original charge. There is this element here of recreation and connectivity. So like trails do go to connectivity, so there's overlap there. But also preserve historic sites, protect sites that we discovered. Add to existing conservation of public areas. So in the case of Ann Johns, that would definitely be added to an existing conservation area. So I think we shouldn't lose sight of the starting blocks that we into this with, and then try to coordinate them. This is good work. We should put that in. Also have to make sure that we include all of our original starting. So some of these are duplicated. Some of them we have to make sure that they get emphasized. So just saying, let's start by looking at these focus areas, adding the extra ones we need in the catch-all category, and then from there, we can move to the evaluation tool and make sure that the evaluation tool coordinates with the overarching objectives that we've identified.
Rick has usually make an excellent point, and I do think that we could add more than a catch-all. We could, for those that are in the charge and in the land law language that aren't included in the open space list, I think it would behoove us to, even if we don't have evaluation criteria now, include placeholders for those additional purposes. So it's probably more than seven. For example, I was just historic preservation because it's so clearly its own thing. Historic preservation, which sort of TBD would be an A category. We have not,
Shouldn't forget the category.
yes, that we should make sure we are incorporating the categories under our charge in addition to the open space. So I guess I'm revising my recommendation is that we organize under the open space focus areas and identify additional purposes in addition to those 6 that we include. And there is also likely miscellaneous in addition to that, because there are non-purpose criteria that we consider as important.
Yeah, I think our original evaluation form was actually structured based on the charge that we look at land that has these various criteria. The charge wasn't that we create any of that stuff. Made it sound like that, but our charge is to look at land, evaluate land that meets those criteria. So hopefully, because we wrote it that way, hopefully our evaluation process meets those criteria. If it doesn't, we'll have to amend that right away. I don't dispute.
You don't hope to do that today.
No, not the next half hour, no. But I think that if we have agreement on the structure and the way in which we're going to approach this, then that, then at least we have a path forward, because there might be additional information. I anticipate that there's additional information that we're going to want and need to make future decisions. So categorization shouldn't need substantial additional information, but as we get into, say, the points, we're likely to need additional information on how we. And then there, I think, are more the philosophical questions that we might want to consider. So as the vulnerability assessment moves forward, are we going to want to start to think about restoration? How do we start to do that? Is a whole different can of worms that I think we can have big picture conversations about, but we're not starting to actually
We would have to come up
design.
with a recommendation from the council. If we were try to suggest land on funds for this restoration. It's actually not allowable.
Well, and I think,
It's not, we can't use those funds for that. Now, we technically are not supposed to recommend that, because it's just not on the list. However, the council can, decide. So we can recommend that things like restoration be included in this and get people on board with the fact that that's worth looking at, so the council can get rid of it.
well, and I would suggest that land bond funds be used to purchase the land, and we look for additional funding to
yes.
do the restoration, and not have it both come out of land bond.
But that's like a 4-step
Right.
conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the actual restoration work and that process is outside of this group. I think this group, the opportunity arises, whoever brings it to this board to say, we'll continue with the Ann John's example. It's for sale again. We would like to purchase it.
Yeah.
And so you all recommend, the purchase, but it's another group that figures out what restoration actually needs to happen and how it's going to be funded.
And that's how land trust presents properties to us as well.
Yeah.
That they make overall budgets of like, this is how much it's gonna cost us for stewarding it. The town's not paying for that, but just so you know, this is the project cost.
Mhm.
It's sort of all the same. We're used to that.
Okay, so are we prepared to categorize? with the existing evaluation tool and where it would fall under the new open space categories. So if we could look at, I think we have a blank evaluation form. Actually, okay, so we have 25 minutes, we have a hard stop. Do we want to give ourselves homework where we do that batching rather than try to do it in real time?
I'd like to ask a favor, and maybe it's just because I'm an old guy and I feel it. When we are looking at this valuation form, and we're going to look at the questions and we're going to look at the points, I don't think this is the way to do it. I mean, I realize it has to be there because we're in public, that's fine. But from the standpoint of actually getting some work done on this thing, could we have a copy? And be looking at it, because
Oh, you mean the screen itself? is
I
not
don't,
the way
I don't,
wasn't
can't
sure.
really see this thing up on the screen.
Oh,
At
no,
least
you're
it's
right.
hard for me anyway.
Right.
To look up there and
I
see
think we
the
all have a
question,
copy.
see the comments, and then see the points. I mean, if
I
we-
got this. This was the grant project.
So
that would-
are you asking that
Print out.
our May
I just think
8th
actually
meeting, we
having
have a
this
printout and, or
And we
we get-
categorize every
and
question,
we categorize every question?
and we start on points, because I think we can. We can start on, well. if we
I think,
categorize-
I support Jesse's approach. Let's do categories first and then do points, because I think we could get through categories in 20 minutes, but I don't think we can get much done with points.
Yeah, I don't think we can get through points in 20 minutes. But
Well,
you
then
can prove
I-
me wrong, but I
I'm just
don't.
saying, whether we want to do it today, people don't have printed copies of this. They have
Oh,
to look up there.
Points for the categories, I think we do need to have a framework that we agree upon. Like, for example, if there's 7 categories, do all 7 categories have the same total number of points that they can achieve?
Right,
Right,
that's
that's
that's what I'm saying. That's why we're gonna have a much more robust conversation about how the categories interact with one another as they relate to points. Because I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting we use the points from the open space plan. I'm not suggesting we use the scoring from the open space plan.
I'm not finding one that's just saying it's a template. I only found a blank one. I mean, a draft one.
So there's one, the categories that are in the existing evaluation toolkit. And then if there are categories that are identified in the open space plan that weren't in the original evaluation plan. And I'm not saying there are, I'm saying if there are, and then where they would, they're already categorized as to where they fit. And then there's the conversation about how we interact with the points, because the points really is how we interact with them. And we do have the public's weighting of those categories from the survey generally, which are, as Jamie mentioned, pretty even. So I don't think, so that's a conversation we have about how the weighting interacts across categories based on public opinion. But then there are also the additional purposes of the land bond and how that interacts in addition, because it's not only the open space plan that we'll be considering moving forward as to our recommendations.
Where's the vulnerability?
Because the vulnerability assessment is a very clear example of how we then incorporate the vulnerability
One,
assessment.
but it's labeled draft. So
Which
this
is
is
a
This is the
it.
23
A
draft. That's good.
conversation.
Okay, perfect.
version, it should say version, not draft.
Yeah, might need a relabel.
So we're very much, I think,
That
a
was
work
when
in
we
progress.
found we had access to some 23
So I think today it's just, do we
Today,
have,
we just agree on the process.
we just agree on the process, and do we need any additional information to guide us moving forward? So I'm suggesting we use our next 20 minutes to identify any additional information we want to have for our next meeting to help guide our process.
I want to go back to what Jeff said earlier about, I don't know where this fits into the process, but there are categories that are so close that how do we, it's great to chunk things down, but there's overlap.
Yes.
So how do we deal
How
with,
do we deal with all of that?
how do we deal with that in terms of points? And I don't know the answer. But And maybe it's a discussion, maybe it's our process, our internal process. This is
This is
discussion.
what I was trying to get at, is that if something falls into clean water and hazardous, you don't wait it twice because of that. It doesn't, it's not more valuable because of that, because they use the exact same criteria. So
But I also think we should, in the score sheet, it should be listed twice,
absolutely,
right? So we know we covered it.
you know, and it
Just to
fell
know.
fell into two categories.
Right. Scored in X category, whatever.
And that's part of our discussion because of that.
Right.
So
Well, and we
that's-
don't,
we can manage that, that's not.
we don't have to be the experts on anything. We can ask for information and feedback from organizations like the Land Trust to help our deliberations.
Just move forward, let's see what we run into. I don't see it as being a problem at all. I think it'd be a really good exercise. I think we'll get to a good place. We just categorize and we decide, how and if the points work the way they are, or whether they need to change. The other issue though is that, because we have a short time, is we were listed in 9 strategy things.
Yes.
Space plan. And we weren't the lead of those, but we were noted. And so the question is, when do we talk about those?
I was putting that under G, kind of like
Next
implications for
meeting.
our purpose.
Okay.
I was calling it charge, but I think it's more purpose. It's like, okay, what is our role? What is our role in these things? What is appropriate given our charge? And then like, what is our preferred role? And then how do we implement it?
Yeah, and as Jamie moves forward with this and Heather moves forward with this, from the standpoint of the open space plan being implemented, does our charge have to change?
Right.
And do we have capacity to do fundraising? That's kind of thing that we're going out after months, and that's, yeah,
Just
I would say bonds.
Jessica, you had asked if there's any additional information that we would like to see before the next meeting when we deal with the focus areas. And yes, there is, but I can do this on my own. I kind of like to see the language of the one authority that the town council passed for the $6 million referendum, to make sure that we are true to that language, that we don't, for the $6 million, I feel like we're kind of bound, and I don't see any consistencies here. And it looks like to look at the language and make sure that.
So it is the same language, it is the same language as always been used for all of the bonds, and that is in your package, and it is on page, because I look at it all the time. So it's Appendix D.
Right.
So the language has been identical for all. Yes. So the purposes in Appendix D are the same and worded the same. There have been no changes. So you do have that information. It was also included in a recent agenda, so I can find it.
Yeah, it's out.
Amazing.
Not paid.
So
I'm okay.
in the next 15 minutes, we're gonna start.
Thank you.
Oh,
May I make a suggestion? Before we go into the details, is there any other public comment or general
oh, that's
comment
true.
that before we go into detail, give Andrew and Scott a chance, and maybe anybody else in the committee has some general thoughts about direction before we go into the weeds here? Does that make sense? Andrew, quickly, do you have anything else to add before we go into the weeds?
I do want to just address 2 things that came up earlier. One of them is something that Noah brought up about town acquiring land. We have suggested several times that town can contract with us. we could add another person, another acquisition person. It's not a atypical practice at all. There's a lot of partnerships around the country like that. We could double our capacity to do acquisition tomorrow. Just need that funding to hire some. We already have the legal counsel set up. We have the administrative support set up. We have experienced acquisition folks. So yeah, I want to just keep that out there as a conversation point that, you know, there are multiple ways of doing this. The other is, it was also brought up about protection of some of the existing town properties. We do have a request in for both transfer of 151.34 acres, and then also putting a conservation easement on town land, another 96.8 acres. That's sitting with the town manager, and that ultimately has to be shared with committees and staff as part of the town's process. So this committee should see it at some point, but it's up to the town manager when he wants to start that process.
Yes, for folks who are new, we are one of the commissions that does evaluate those requests, either the town disposes of property or transfers property, which we have done twice now as a board. So we evaluate each parcel and make a recommendation to town council. We are one of a host. So for example, the public utilities takes a look to see if they need it for some reason. So we evaluate it on its conservation potential, and we have done that a couple times now in the past 2 years. And I will share that with you when it is shared with me. It has not been.
Andrew, Scott, asking from our broader scheduling perspective, are you anticipating bringing properties for us to review in moderate to near future?
We do have a pipeline going, so, and I've got projects in various stages, and there are some that are getting close to bringing before this board. As far as the timing of it, you know, I'm probably thinking the soonest would be like June.
Not so far away.
So we have a meeting scheduled for May based on the results of this workshop. I'm recommending that we focus on the evaluation toolkit and process. Unless we get an application, we could also, because this is a workshop, I don't think we can schedule a meeting. We could also schedule a June meeting, which is not currently scheduled.
I think if we all look at this,
I think we all look at this, we write down the categories it fits under, the start, and then I think we could do that relatively quickly and then move on to the scoring component.
For what it's worth, I did a quick cut of this kind of thing because I assumed we wanted to be able to identify each of our questions in this relative to the categories. So there's a version that's out there that it's a PDF, but I can send it as an Excel file. So it's our evaluation form, and there's a yellow box with a letter, and that letter is H for habitat, C for clean water. Just shortcut. I'm not trying to.
No,
push
it already doesn't
you.
work.
It's just that if you can look at it, if you're not as into this open space plan as I've been, close to it, you can look at it and then, you know, print off the 6 categories and take a look at the detail that's in them. Because if you just say clean water is just a clean water question, well, you need to, you know, erodible soils and pervious surfaces, understand what is in there, because you can't really categorize it based on our questions are more detailed than clean water, you know. So if you're going to categorize under those things, And that's what I tried to do. I've already, as I was looking at it earlier, I've already made 2 changes. So obviously, it'll be really neat to see how everybody categorizes these various questions as you go through, which fall in clean water, habitat, whatever. So it'd be really, really useful. But it's there, and I can send that as a spreadsheet. I can put it on the drive as a spreadsheet if people can play with it. It's out there as a PDF. It's just that as a PDF, you can't really do anything with it.
Right.
You gotta look at it. Right?
Yeah, I think it'd be great. So Doug, I really appreciate the fact that you helped develop the original evaluation toolkit and you've been on the open space ad hoc committee. So you and I probably have the most insight into this. So really appreciate that you took a first stab at that. And I think if you could upload the spreadsheet, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
PDFs can be hard.
Yeah.
We do have a shared drive for PCLB. If you do not have access to it, please let me know. I'll get Micah to give you access, and then we sit down in May on the 8th and hash out the categorization and then get to the full brawl that is the points.
Should we plan on 2 hours? It's now an hour and a half.
I think it's an hour and a half now, so we're
For
currently
this, for this task.
for this task. Yeah, I think if people can swing it.
We're going to have to put the time in. Do that meeting, try to carry it over. It's very good.
So we'll just have to, so do we want to meet earlier or go later?
It's May 8th, so
Maybe,
10 to 12, I hope. All right,
yes. So we can meet at 9, we did today, or we're trying to schedule 10 to 12.
That's fine.
We just need to make sure we've got the room.
But I think I pre-booked him, but I wrote a note to double check.
And then the other thing is your new category 7. And so, we put some thought into that. What are the other considerations that?
So for example, public investment was what I was thinking of. It's something we consider, but doesn't fit into.
When you look at the evaluation form, you'll see
Probably a lot of
it's one of the end ones.
Yeah.
No, actually, we developed this based on 5 others that had been developed, including Maine Coast Heritage Trust. So it was not something we made up ourselves. So it's very habitat oriented, it's very clean water oriented, it's very connection oriented, it's very large space, oriented. So, there's not a lot new in terms of what the open space plan has identified. What the open space plan is doing for us, number one, for us, I think, is giving us better information. I mean, and it's giving us Jamie's operation and people who are going to help us to have the tools to use. But this information, to be able to go through the process of what does habitat mean to us, what's it worth, and having the mapping and the capability of that's updated is huge. But as we go through, I'm sure that we'll want to change things that we see in there, and it'll be really useful. But there are a couple of things that we added that don't fall into the category. The public investment piece, is this a purchase or is it an easement? Because we gave a little bit more points to a purchase. Because the intention was it's a scorecard, but it's not a checklist. So the weighting of importance is coming through the points so that you can do relative importance across very diverse properties by doing the point system. That's the whole thing. If you just do a checklist and then try to compare diverse properties, you run into, and we saw this when we looked at other towns that were doing this kind of thing. And they were either saying, it meets a certain level of criteria or it doesn't. And then people like the Maine Coast Heritage Trust were saying, well, we look at diverse properties in diverse places with diverse values. So we need the weighting capability in the score. That's all.
that was one of my general comments about the existing category of the scorecard is I think it's overly weighted toward larger properties. Larger is maybe always better, maybe not, I don't know, but I don't know, get people's perspective, maybe Andrew and Scott, about size of property and is it always better to have big property? Or maybe another way to say it is, should we just discount smaller property?
But from an ecological standpoint, usually bigger is better. Landscape ecology standpoint, there's a lot of reasons to get into the for that. Also from recreational standpoints, bigger does tend to be better. But we're also facing the reality on the ground in Scarborough, which is that there aren't big chunks of property out there, or at least not that are left or not necessarily readily available in the market or aren't interested. So the reality is that there are smaller parcels, and you absolutely can. I mean, I think the town has a great track record of showing that you can take smaller parcels and build something larger. A lot of effort to expand existing places, connect places together.
That was my thought, that small and contiguous
Yeah,
might be a nice weighting.
yeah, small and really important, right?
Corridors.
If
are
you,
often
if you
quite
said
small.
you're gonna buy a 5-acre parcel, and it might block off development of a 100-acre parcel, we might say, oh, we want that 5 acres, or something like that, right? So we also need to keep in mind, our goal is, what our goal, I should keep saying that, our strategy is 30 by 30. To get there, we're gonna have to take a lot of, I think we're gonna have to take a lot of smaller pieces of property.
I'd just like to point out something to you, because I realize there are some folks on council and other folks who have an impression about this committee. We haven't held up the purchase of any land that qualified under both our evaluation system and our on-site evaluation.
Right.
Our descriptions and the other values that we put on it. We've been brought properties that all qualified because of the work that's been done by the land trust. And we've purchased properties that the town said we're going to purchase. They just spent so we're going to use the funds.
Yeah, sure.
So, but from the standpoint of our evaluation criteria, we haven't shut anything down because of that. We have, over the years, adjusted the way we look at the point system because we started seeing much smaller properties. And so we started looking at saying, okay, how do we compare the smaller properties for points as opposed to how do we compare to fuller farm? And we did see a difference, some consistency in terms of size. So we started rating on the basis of consistency across properties of similar characteristics.
I'm just wondering if you can separate the two, quality and quantity.
That's what we do.
Do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Are you saying that we do in this form? This form is only a piece of what we do.
Right, well, yeah.
We've always focused on quality, quality and quantity as a committee.
Right.
We shouldn't get too hung up on this. It's a valuable tool, and it's only a tool.
We're spending a
right?
lot of time on it.
I
right?
know. It drives me crazy because people get really hung up on the fact, well, you got to update that evaluation tool. No, our evaluation tool is doing its job because all it does is inform our decision making. It doesn't.
And our discussions.
Yeah. And yes, it should be recategorized, and yes, we should look at everything and update it. But let's not spend 15 meetings on a point system. Let's decide whether it adds any value to our decision making. And if it does, then it's doing its job.
I think of this as we're getting better and new information from a host of different plans, and that it's important for us to consider how that informs our conversations and our decisions. That does not mean this is our threshold. This is really a framework for deliberating, and we do a good job at that. So I'm going to call the meeting because it is now 11 o'clock. We have our next conversation May 8th. And please do your homework. I think that'll make the conversation more robust and appreciate everyone's time.